this is going to destroy a lot of the altcoins. And we'll see what happens on the way up. We'll see if any of those recover, but I highly doubt it. All right, let's, I'm happy to do Q&A if anyone has any questions. Let's just jump right into it. Just raise your hand, and thank you, Guillermo, for, you want to ask the first question? Let's do it.
Hello.
There you go.
Okay. Hi, Don. Thank you. Okay. First of all, I wanted to start with a general question. What do you think about the outlook of Bitcoin for 2019, taking in consideration that we might be looking at a correction at the S&P and the American market for next year? I don't know what are your expectations with the American market, and what might be the scenario if Bitcoin changes from a bear market to a bull market in a scenario where the S&P 500 is right now on a correction, or will be on a correction during 19.
Yeah, the dynamic between the equity markets and Bitcoin, they really shouldn't be correlated, but they are on a big scale. So I was hopeful that the S&P can go back to new all-time highs. If the S&P and like the general stock markets, if they are struggling, that's not necessarily good for Bitcoin. I know that a lot of people think that when bad things happen, then their gold and their Bitcoin is going to rise in value, but that's not exactly true. You want there to be some fear and some turmoil in traditional markets, but not too much. So the problem with a big crash in US stocks is, look, I know people want Bitcoin to be for the third world and to save Venezuela and help remittance in the Philippines and the African countries. The reality is it is still a very speculative asset. And the price of Bitcoin is still driven by the richest countries, mostly the US, some Europe, some Australia. So when the US stock markets are in trouble, then the companies are in trouble, people don't do as well financially, people are not in a good mood, and people have less money. So they are less likely to speculate in Bitcoin. And if you're losing money in the stock market, but you're used to a certain way of living, you're going to continue to try to live that way, and you have to sell something to maintain that standard of living, and that something might be Bitcoin. So I remember that in the 2008 financial crisis, when the real estate was crashing, and a lot of the people that were gold believers and they have a lot of gold, and they're like, finally, the world is dying, the world is imploding, I'm going to get so rich on my gold that I've been holding for years. And gold went down 33% in the 2008 financial crisis, and no one understood why. And that was because it doesn't matter how much gold you have. If you and your family have just lost their jobs, it's great that you had the gold. Now it's time to sell it to continue to put food on the table. So you don't really want a big crash in the stock market. So the one thing that I do think is going to be very beneficial to Bitcoin over the next few years is this continued push by governments to try to eliminate cash. That's going to make Bitcoin very useful to those that like the cash element. Also, the European currency, the euro, I don't know how much longer that currency can stay intact. because we've already seen Cyprus had major issues, Greece had major issues, Italy continues to come very close to major issues, Spain, parts of Spain want to break off, maybe all of Spain will try, and people still think Germany is doing very well, but even under the hood, their economy isn't doing very great. So eventually, it'll be every country for themselves. And if that currency starts to fall apart into its components from each of the countries that used to have their own currencies, then that could also be very beneficial to Bitcoin because people in those countries may still want a unified currency. It's just that they might consider one that isn't under the control of any single person or any single country's influence. But yeah, the big drop in the stock market is not good for the price of Bitcoin. Just talk. I'll turn it on. Oh, maybe not. Mike?
Hello?
Yep, there we go.
Yeah. No, maybe out of place this question, but in any case, I'm curious about if you have a view on the fundamental value of Bitcoin. I mean, looking at where the bottom is, well, you know, the bottom is zero. So where should we be buying because it's cheap, really cheap?
Yeah, so from a fundamental perspective, Bitcoin is very good. Like we haven't had any technological issues with Bitcoin in years. It's actually amazing how fundamentally sound Bitcoin is. But being fundamentally sound doesn't always immediately correlate to the price of Bitcoin. Look, one Bitcoin is worth $20,000 to me today, but that's because I have a much further outlook into the future. And last year, when the price of Bitcoin went above 7,000, it started to scare me a little bit because I didn't know how high it was going to go. It could have gone to 100,000, but the price was just getting out of control. Do I think Bitcoin is oversold based on its fundamentals right now? Yes. But do I think it has further to fall? The answer is yes as well. Because people panic. I just saw a tweet from Whale Panda earlier today where he said, you know, around this time last year, all my friends and family were asking to buy Bitcoin between $12,000 and $16,000. Now I'm telling them they should buy it now and they're not interested. So the same people that were buying a year ago are scared now. And that's generally how the markets bottom. If you have a long-term time horizon, starting to dollar cost average at these prices, I think is not a bad idea. I think you were getting close. I will really like Bitcoin at about 3,000 to 3,200, but I still don't think that's going to be the bottom. I think we are going to fall under 3,000. We may even fall under 2,000. I'm also hoping we rebound really quick because this is not very good for miners at the moment. We're already seeing the hash rate drop significantly in Bitcoin. But here's the good news. The good news is that Bitcoin still has a lot of hash power. A lot. In fact, I don't think the hash rate can drop fast enough for the halving to take place in January of 2021. Because remember, according to the actual white paper, we're supposed to be having the halving every January because the Genesis block was in January. The fact that we had a halving back in July of last year, not 2 years ago, is because there was way too much hash power. And this year, we were projected to have a halving in May, which means there is even more hash power. So Bitcoin is being produced a lot faster than the algorithm can adjust to the upside. So having that little reset is not necessarily a bad idea. It also shows you that it's not very easy to print money. If you were going to start mining because you thought it was going to be easy to print money and get rich, well, it's not that easy. Very competitive. Now, this will wreak havoc on the altcoins, especially the proof of work altcoins. So if you're mining on an altcoin with the same hashing algorithm as Bitcoin, you're probably going to get 51% attacked because it's so easy. Just go and attack Bcash now, convert it to Bitcoin, and take your money. And this was, I sent out a big tweet against Zuko from Zcash, who just doesn't understand what Nakamoto consensus is. Yeah, his coin is at a major risk of a 51% attack by miners because there is profit to be made on 51% attacking minority chains, because you have a chain above you where you can exit. You can just attack a coin, immediately sell that for another coin because no one is realizing you're attacking a minority coin. So you take your profits right into Bitcoin and you're gone. That's it. You made your money. You can't really 51% attack Bitcoin because the value will just plummet. And then how do you earn money from the attack? And the answer is you can't. Because if you can attack 51% Bitcoin, then no one will trust any coin. So, I mean, this drop will clean out the space. So there's lots of positive things on it. As far as other fundamentals go, I always go back to the word unconfiscatable. I mean, if you guys heard the prior two panels, one about protecting your keys and one about wallets. Bitcoin is the first asset in human history that is actually unconfiscatable if you properly protect it. And I don't even know how to put a value on that. When people realize Bitcoin's fundamentals of being unconfiscatable and being censorship-resistant value transfer, I fully expect the price to go back up. Like, I can't think of any other currency, even today, I'd rather use as payment for my services. And I price my services in Bitcoin because, hey, if the price of Bitcoin goes down, then I'm suffering with the rest of you. So, and we'll get out of it. You just gotta adjust your business to be able to ride out the bull market and the bear market. Any other questions? We have a mic going around, so just raise your hand and we'll pass it over.
If you were a Bitcoin Cash supporter, what would be your idea now, and what would be the strategy for Bitcoin Cash?
Which one?
If you were a Bitcoin Cash...
I know, but which one? There's two different answers there.
You tell me.
Oh, boy. So, I think Bitcoin ABC is in serious trouble. Like, serious trouble. Because Bitcoin SV just went up in price a lot. I think they're on the verge of a flippening between Bitcoin ABC and Bitcoin SV. Because Bitcoin ABC is kind of in the middle of nowhere. I think Bitcoin SV I think they have a bit of a claim because they are actually going to the Satoshi white paper. They want no technological changes in the code. They want to, they just want to, they want the pure early version of Bitcoin with the bug fixes, right? Like the bug that caused 90-something billion Bitcoin to be printed, the bug in 2013 that caused the hard fork. So they fixed the bugs, but they have no interest in doing anything, any technological changes onto the code. So no SegWit and none of the stuff that Bitcoin ABC is trying to do. And yeah, Bitcoin ABC is in trouble because they've been supporting, like Jihan and Bitmain have probably been supporting the price. Roger's probably been supporting the price. And there's nobody to sell to. I think the price is almost down to 3% of the value of a Bitcoin. And what do? If I was them, I'd try to convert to Bitcoin while I can, but the price is down so much, like it doesn't matter at this point. I mean, back in the day, I said that the price of Bcash should not be above $1, and they're about to cross under 100, so I'm getting close. It'll be a race to the dollar between them and Ethereum. It's going to be very interesting. And the same thing goes for Ethereum, right? Like, I'm sorry, Ethereum should not be a speculative value transfer or value storage. Like, it's meant to be gas. It's meant to just be destroyed. It's and that was one of the things that I found very scammy about Ethereum. It's wouldn't it have been a lot more efficient to build a platform to move ICOs around and charge a small fee? So instead of making your money on the pre-mine of Ethereum, just collect the transaction fee instead of burning the transaction fee, right? Just collect it. Take the fee. You could have made your whole database a lot more efficient. Collect the fee and move the ICOs around. Because the ICOs themselves are centralized. They're created by a person. They can be regulated. So having a platform that can't be regulated isn't very useful because you can regulate the ICO. So you might as well provide the most efficiency to the ICO by collecting a fee and making sure their transaction goes through. We'll see what happens. We'll see if any of the ICOs try to move to the liquid sidechain. That would be interesting. All right, anything else? Yeah, I'm keeping an eye on the price of Bitcoin right now. We're at 35.61, so we're actually hitting yearly lows right now as I speak. No, actually, the yearly low looks like it was 34.74, probably about a month ago, unless it just happened. Sorry. Yeah. I still think we're going to be at 3,000 to 3,200 very, very soon. And that should be a decent short-term buying opportunity. Maybe it'll turn into a long-term buying opportunity.
Tom, hi, how are you? In terms of time, how much do you think that it would take to, I mean, a few minutes ago you told us that the price will like bump very quickly. I mean, in terms of time, how much do you think it will take from now to that bump, or from the I don't know, from the real bottom to that bump, or to that?
Yeah, so unfortunately, the current bear market continues to perfectly resemble the last bear market of 2014 and 2015. It's scary how similar they are. So back then, the first week of January was the big fall where the price fell about 50% in a day or in 2 days, and we ended up bottoming out at about $150. The equivalent today would be about $1,500, approximately like 1,000 to 1,500. And back then, that happened the first week of January. What I'm expecting is a fall to about 3,000 over sometime this year, and we only have about 2-3 weeks left. And then I do expect a bounce to the $5,000 to $6,000 vicinity. I'm still looking for that bounce. but I think that will set us up for one more catastrophic fall around March, April. And I think that would be the bottom, like going into the summer might be the bottom, but that doesn't mean we go straight up. We might just get stuck at current prices of 3,000 till the end of the summer and then start to go up, because that would continue to mimic the 2014 and 15 bear market. However, I do think this time is going to be different. I think sooner or later, the way the price is dropping, because it's so similar to 2014 and 15 bear market, I think at some point it's going to have to do something different because it's just too similar. So I do think that this time we can have more of a V bottom. So when we drop to under 3,000, maybe we'll only drop to 2,800 and then swiftly go up and continue going up. So I would like to see more of a stock market kind of rebound, the way the stock market rebounded back in 2009 when the US stock market crashed really hard in March of 2009. And then it started going up really quickly and just continued to go up. So I actually think that that is pretty likely in Bitcoin. As you saw a presentation from Genesis, that OTC markets are still going very, very strong. And I'm getting text messages. One of my next stops, they only have like one ATM in that region. And they're like, oh, the ATM isn't working right now. So if anybody wants to sell Bitcoin, there's plenty of buyers. So it looks like the OTC market, those that are willing to hold on to Bitcoin for a long time, are about to seriously start buying Bitcoin. Also, about 6 or 9 months ago, I had this suspicion when everyone kept saying, Wall Street is getting in, the institutional investors are buying up Bitcoin. This is back when it was like 14,000, 15,000. And that didn't really make sense to me because they don't really buy into the hype. They kind of cause the hype and then they end up in this group think, thinking it's not going to end. But very few, like none of the institutional investors got in on the housing bubble at the end. I mean, they kind of just held on to it, but they helped cause it. And I had the suspicion saying, hey, if I was a major institutional player, and I was really interested in a lot of Bitcoin, but it's too expensive. And I feel that it's overvalued. What can I do? Well, I know that the order books are very thin. I know that price discovery is fragile. So why don't I, if I want to buy $100 million worth of Bitcoin, wouldn't it be better for me to like buy $10 or $20 million worth of Bitcoin now, use that Bitcoin to crash the price on these thin, unregulated exchanges, and then buy up the other $80 million worth of Bitcoin in the OTC markets at a much lower price? That would have been the smarter thing to do. And I'm not surprised, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of them did that. So now is going to be the time where, now that the retail investor is generally scared, only those, the real believers of Bitcoin are interested in picking it up. I would be very interested in picking up all the Bitcoin I can under $3,000 and especially under $2,000. And I think the institutional investors are looking at that as well. Because, again, you don't want to crash the price of Bitcoin too much. It may never return because of the mining could be pretty fragile. So I still think that we can bounce from the 2,000 area, and when we start to go up, we can go up fairly quickly. I think it'll take time to get back to 20,000. I would be surprised if we go back to 20,000 in 2019. I think it's going to take until 2020 to get back to 20K. Anyone else? Any other questions? Oh, back there. Oh, there's another mic.
No one? No one.
I thought somebody had a question.
I'll ask another one then. What is XRP and what is its fundamental value in your opinion?
Yeah, so I'm not a fan of XRP at all. I don't see any the only fundamental value XRP has is if they're able to convert it to the stock of the Ripple Labs company, which probably is not advisable either. Like, you just don't need a speculative token. I mean, if for anything they do, XRP is offering a database to institutions like the banking sector. They're offering them a database, but like, why do you need your own currency to offer someone a database? Like, it's just like the token itself makes absolutely no sense. Why does it have speculative value? Why do people trade XRP anonymously to get its price discovery? Like we understand why Bitcoin is traded anonymously and why Bitcoin has speculative value, because Bitcoin has these features. It's a non-government controlled currency. But Ripple isn't trying to be a non-government controlled currency. But they have this feature, and that feature is actually probably going to destroy Ripple because it's unnecessary unless they separate themselves from the token, which they can't actually do because then they would be admitting that the token is actually useless. So they have to have one product in their offering of a dozen different products. They have to maintain one product that claims to be useful for the XRP token, and no one is actually using it. So, like, no bank would use it. I mean, why would you want an additional currency? This has always been my issue with using Bitcoin as remittance, because I don't see it being cheaper or better. Because if you're in the US and you want to send money to something like, let's say, even in Venezuela, if you want to send your relatives in Venezuela money, you could send it like dollars to them, because then you have to convert dollars into the Venezuelan bolivar, or what's their new one? Not the petro. They had another one. Which one? Yeah. This. All right. And so you don't need another currency, because now you got to get someone in the US to convert to Bitcoin. So that costs a transaction fee. Sending the Bitcoin is simple, but then someone on the other side has to understand Bitcoin and then convert Bitcoin into bolivars to spend it. Now, what I heard earlier today is interesting, is that they do prefer Bitcoin right now to the US dollars, but it's not for the reason you would think. It's because a dollar is too big. It's not divisible enough. Like, if you get a dollar, it's hard to get an actual single dollar in there. So you kind of have to send $100 bills, and then $100 bills gives you too many bolivars. So the problem is now the dollar is like, Bitcoin creates a micropayment, because you can hold on to the Bitcoin and you can sell it in tiny little fractions. So Bitcoin is actually providing good divisibility. And I'm a believer in Lightning. I think Lightning will succeed, and I think Bitcoin will scale to micropayments, which is great. Because if Bitcoin does scale to micropayments, then you absolutely do not need any of these altcoins. You might have had an argument saying, well, Litecoin is silver to Bitcoin's gold, and it'll always be useful because there's only 21 million Bitcoin, and Litecoin can have a micropayment on Bitcoin. But if you've read the book, The Bitcoin Standard by Saifedean, he explained why silver continues to lose its monetary property. And that's because historically, silver was the micropayment to gold, because 500 years ago, a single gram of gold would buy you too many things. You couldn't buy your coffee with, a gram of gold. And silver became very useful as a micropayment. But in the world of today's technology, once you use gold as a backing for your fiat currency, then you can use gold as a micropayment, because you can subdivide that gram of gold as far as you like. Now, governments took that off completely. They separated from the gold standard. But if they hadn't, if governments did not separate from the gold standard, keeping the gold and silver standard was going to be tricky. And there was a presentation earlier talking about how when you peg gold to silver, you created all these distortions. And that's because gold was becoming infinitely divisible and there wasn't a need for silver. So any country that guaranteed a certain amount of gold per certain amount of silver ended up in a lot of trouble, because everyone would just send all of the silver to that country and convert it into gold, because silver was losing all of its value from being money. And I expect to see the same exact thing in a lot of these altcoins. As Bitcoin becomes more and more of a micropayment and usable for small transactions as well as large transactions, as well as picking up more anonymity. You already, if those of you that are using the Wasabi wallet, already realizing that, whoa, you really can't trace this. It is becoming like cash, completely anonymous. And as these features continue to get better and better as far as anonymity and as far as micropayments, then believing in altcoins like Litecoin, Monero, Zcash, whatever, you really then believe in the fractional reserve and infinite inflation, because Bitcoin has the best security and it will have the best privacy and it will have the best divisibility. So wanting an alternative, wanting a competitor, is basically devaluing Bitcoin and believing in, infinite money printing, because that's what it comes down to. So that's why I think Bitcoin will continue to separate. And I don't even like thinking of Litecoin and Monero and all of these others as competitors to Bitcoin. They're not competing on the same level. Bitcoin is competing to be a new standard for value. It's competing with the dollars. It's competing with the euro. It's competing with even gold. And all of these other things, I mean, to me, they're more like companies. They're more like company stock. They're more like believing in a company and not believing in a trustless system. So I do believe Bitcoin will continue to separate, and on the next bull run, I mean, other stuff will speculate, and like the reason why a lot of these altcoins, why they go up so much more than Bitcoin during the last bull market. In a bull market of 2017, these altcoins pumped so much. And the only explanation I have for that is when people got so rich on Bitcoin finally going up, when you start to get rich on Bitcoin going up, you say to yourself, so I got a bunch of Bitcoin, I just made 40, 50 times my money. Why not throw $1,000 at Ethereum? Why not throw $1,000 at Ripple that's worth less than a penny? It becomes a lot easier for you to speculate on random things when you're earning money. But the opposite is also true. Now that people are poorer, they're not really interested in buying speculative assets to get rich. And I think on the next bull run, you're going to see less of that. I think people have learned from this ICO bubble and from these altcoins, as Bitcoin's fundamentals continue to strengthen and Lightning's working and privacy is better. And I think people are going to speculate less on these altcoins because all it was is speculation. Well, I'm already rich from Bitcoin. If I lose $500, not a big deal. But what if that $500 turns into 5 million? And it did for a lot of people in the altcoin space. I don't think that's going to come back, which is another reason why I think a little more pain needs to be felt before we can return. And I would like to see Bitcoin return and less of this speculative into altcoins. All right, I got about 3 minutes left. Rodolfo, you want to ask the final question?
No, actually, hello. So you say that Bitcoin will come out resilient about this ICO bubble? Yes, like more strength after what happens. So the next time we go up, you expect a smaller decrease, or I mean, what will be the impact for you when the next time we go up?
So I expect us to go back up.
I'm sorry, just another question, because I don't know if you addressed it before I was here. If you expect it goes up to how much?
So I think once we break $20,000 on the price of Bitcoin, probably sometime in late 2021, probably 2022, it'll take a few more years. Once we break 20,000, I think we're going to go up very quickly. It's just like what happened last time. Once we broke 1,000, once we broke 1,500, we went up fairly quickly. In 1 year, we went from 1,500 all the way to 20,000. What happens is when you have a lot more value, it's actually harder to move the price up. I think once we break 20,000, I can't see us going past 45,000. Like, it's not going to be like 20,000 to 150,000. I don't see it. I think as the value of Bitcoin goes up, like, it becomes harder to for it to keep rising. I think the next bubble would be approximately 45 to 50,000. But I could be off again. So last time I thought that this would all end around 7,500, and clearly we went from 7,500 to 20,000. So yeah, I was off by a little bit, but I was only off by about 3 weeks, right? So even though you're off a lot as far as like the nominal price is concerned, I mean, I started throwing in a lot of warnings at 7,500, and we hit 7,500 in early November. The market topped in mid-December, and within a few weeks after that, we were dropping back down to 6,000. Then we went up again to 12. So I think the next bubble will be ending around 45 or 50, and probably around 2022, 2023.
Okay. So the halving, you don't think it will have a straight impact in the moment it occurs?
No, it will. It will. It's just not going to lead to a crazy price appreciation. The halving will certainly help. And I do think the price will already be recovered. I think the bottom will come before the halving. But the halving is not yet priced in to the price. It's just too far away. Mm-hmm. I think it will be time to start pricing in the halving around this time next year, right? So at the next LABITCONF, we'll talk a lot about the halving.
Oh, so you're joining again? You're joining again?
Say again?
You're joining again?
Oh yeah, no, I'll definitely be here again. I'm pretty sure Bitcoin will be with us. And yeah, I might do a presentation on preparing for the halving from a trader perspective. It will be the perfect time, actually, with like 6 months to go. It'll be great.
Great. There is a word that I usually do talk when I give some talks about price, which is the difference between emission and offer, no? People think that as there will be less Bitcoins created, yes, there will be less offer, and that's a mistake, no? Because the offer is the market that puts their coins on sale, yes, while the emission is the new minting, emission, I don't know in Spanish. So actually, it wouldn't need to have a straight impact, yes, because even though there is less minting, the offer could keep being the same one, the final offer. So the market, I think, it's not related to the minting, it's more related to what people understand because of the minting, because of the future offer, because of the future lack of new Bitcoins, no?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. So I think when the next bull market starts and the next bull market starts moving, it will really be nice to have, change the mentality on the convention, and maybe it'll be time to start talking in bits instead of in Bitcoins. This way you are talking about, well, I'll sell you, 100 bits, and that's going to be worth like 100 bits would be like $10 or something, or $20.
It's always fun when you talk to someone new and they say, well, imagine I buy you 100 Bitcoins. I say, no, wait, 100 Bitcoins, we're talking about, I don't know, $2 million. Are you okay? Yes, well, okay. So imagine if I buy you half a Bitcoin, no? It's always this, like, people expect to get 1 Bitcoin, and that's the importance of the price, and that is as important as 1 kilogram of gold.
Yeah, I've ran into this problem. Man, I don't know if I want to talk about my friends too much, but I had a friend that was buying a Bitcoin, wanted to buy a Bitcoin when it was like $14,000, $15,000, and he really wanted like a whole Bitcoin. And I'm like, no, don't. Just like, I talked him out of buying a whole Bitcoin, and I only talked him into buying half a Bitcoin. And I'm happy I did that because now the price has dropped a lot, but he still wants that one full Bitcoin. And we got to get people out of that mentality, like they have to hold one Bitcoin. It's not about that. So I don't know how we're going to change the convention. I still like bits. So a bit is like 100 Satoshis. So that would be better.
Yes, it's difficult to use decimals, and it's difficult to use big numbers too. So bits, it's perhaps two in the middle, two big numbers, to say 10,000 bits or 105,000 bits. It's calculating, it's also still complicated as using decimals with Bitcoins, But we're more used to use round numbers than using decimals 0.0022120. So, okay. Bueno, ¿alguna otra pregunta antes de cambiar, avanzar? Yes.
Hi. What are your thoughts about institutional money getting into crypto and the Bitcoin futures?
So the Bitcoin futures, I don't think they have any effect on Bitcoin. The volume on the futures is pretty small, and when the futures were launching, I said, well, the futures are cash settled, and because they're cash settled, they're not responsible for Bitcoin's price discovery. It's almost like saying that the S&P 500 futures control the price of the S&P 500, and they don't. The S&P 500 is just an aggregate of 500 stocks that are actually being traded with price discovery and the delivery. So in gold or oil, the futures markets actually have deliveries. So the futures are price discovery of the price of those assets. In Bitcoin, I don't think the futures have any actual effect, but I am happy that the futures exist, because by having the futures market, it legitimizes Bitcoin and prevents it from let's say, the US government getting really, really mad and saying Bitcoin is illegal. Like some countries have tried to declare Bitcoin illegal. And we all say, well, you can't make Bitcoin illegal, people will still do it. But a lot of people won't do it because they don't want to be in trouble with the law. And But by having Bitcoin futures, it makes it pretty much impossible for the US government to ever declare Bitcoin to be evil or illegal because there's futures. So that's the good news. I still think Bitcoin futures are not all that relevant. Now, institutional investors, those that are buying Bitcoin, that one is interesting. Like, you want Bitcoin to be as distributed as possible. So you don't want these big players, which is why it was interesting when, the whole Mike Novogratz thing, like a recent article in Bloomberg says that he's lost over $100 million. So that's good. That's going to probably end up, he'll probably end up exiting that position and Bitcoin would get spread out. But someone like Tim Draper, who bought like 400,000 Bitcoin back in 2014, recently came out and said, no, this is fine, let it go lower and I'll just buy more. That scares me a little bit. That's a lot of Bitcoin in concentration of a single player. I mean, Bitcoin gives all of us the opportunity to be like the institutional investor. So you have the same access to Bitcoin as they do. So that's great. It's really hard. It's a little bit harder. I mean, gold is the same way. People can buy their gold, but then you got to protect it and store it. And the thing is, you probably have a better understanding of how to protect your Bitcoin than some of these institutional investors, if they're actually holding on to the Bitcoin. I mean, there's pros and cons. Not a lot of people are going to take possession of their Bitcoin and they're going to let other third-party institutions hold it for them. Again, this is good and bad. Going back to the ETF, which I don't think is coming anytime soon, but if there was an ETF, the ETF could create a problem because that's a lot of Bitcoin under the control of a single entity with government oversight. So the way the US government at least confiscated gold back in the 1930s, it was very easy. I mean, they did it with the equivalent of a phone call because all the gold was being held by the banks for people. And all they had to do was call the banks and say, we'll take that gold now. And the people will still have money, but it's now going to be fiat money. And that scares me if that happens to Bitcoin in, let's say, 2033, where, on a 100th anniversary of the gold confiscation, where, let's say, we get the Bitcoin ETF and a lot of these major banks and institutional investors bought Bitcoin, but they didn't take possession. They're holding it at some entity under, the regulatory eye of the government. And now, between the ETF, the Bitcoin underlying the ETF, and the Bitcoin being held by the banks or by middlemen holding Bitcoin on behalf of the big players, all of a sudden there's like 40-50% of all the Bitcoin in circulation is being held by an entity. And then again, the government makes a phone call and says, we'll take that Bitcoin now. And now what happens? What happens to the confidence of the network when a single entity all of a sudden has 40-50%? And this could create a big conflict between nations, right? Because if other countries are have a claim on our Bitcoin, but then the U.S. government or a different, at the moment it's the U.S. government because they're the global superpower, but it doesn't have to be the U.S. government in 20, 30 years, could be a different one. If they go and confiscate the Bitcoin, so you really want to hold on to it as much as you can, but if 50% of all the Bitcoin is under the control of the government, the confidence of the people in that currency is probably going to crash. I don't know what will be the equivalent. Maybe there'll be something new by then. Maybe something I mean, well, what makes Bitcoin valuable really is the fact that it can't change. A lot of people think that someone can just create a better Bitcoin, but they can't, because the ability to have governance and being able to make quick changes to your protocol is what will prevent it from being hard money. Because SegWit was so difficult to get into the code, that's what makes Bitcoin valuable. The fact that you can't change it. Even if everyone knows, not everyone, even if most people know the change is beneficial, the change makes it scalable, the change makes it more private, and it's still difficult to get that change in, it tells the people how difficult it is to make any changes in Bitcoin's fundamentals, to make any changes in Bitcoin's stable value. And that brings confidence to people that, hey, Bitcoin is not going to have a backdoor. Bitcoin is not going to be, the protocol is not going to be controlled. And that's great.
Okay, don't be so comfortable there. Okay,
We're good.
That's it. Enough
All
for
right.
today.
Everyone's coming back. Thank
A
you,
big
guys.
applause.